Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Science Secrets. Tonight, we are going to explore something quiet and intimate, a feeling you have almost certainly experienced at least once in your life. You are sitting somewhere peaceful, perhaps by a window, or in a soft room with the lamp turned low, and without any reason you can name, you feel it. A gentle certainty that somewhere nearby, someone is watching you. You turn, and there is no one. And yet, the feeling was so real, so close, so unmistakably there. Scientists have a name for this sensation. They study it with great curiosity and deep respect. And what they have found is not strange or unsettling at all. It is, in fact, one of the most beautifully designed features of the human mind. Your brain is always working softly on your behalf, reading invisible signals, listening to the air around you, protecting you in ways so gentle you never even notice. Tonight, we are going to follow that quiet work, step by step, fact by fact, until you understand why your own mind is such a remarkable, tender place to rest. So, find a comfortable position now. Let your shoulders settle. Let your hands grow still. And let the story begin. There is a part of your brain that never truly sleeps. Even now, as you breathe slowly and the world outside grows quieter, a small cluster of neurons deep inside your mind is gently, continuously scanning. Not for danger exactly. More the way a lighthouse sweeps across water, not searching for anything specific, simply aware, simply present. This region is called the amygdala, and it is ancient beyond imagining. It existed in something like its current form long before language, long before thought as we know it. It is older than memory. The amygdala does not speak to you in words. It speaks in feelings. A tightening at the back of the neck, a sudden alertness without a cause you can name, a sense, soft and certain, that the space around you has changed in some small way. Scientists who study this region describe it as an early warning system. But that phrase makes it sound urgent and alarming, and it is neither. It is more like a very gentle companion who sits beside you in the dark and simply says quietly, "Something is different here." When you feel watched, this is often the first voice you hear. The amygdala picks up something, a shift in the light, a faint sound below conscious hearing, a change in air pressure too subtle for your ears, and it sends that feeling upward through your mind like a ripple moving across still water. By the time you are consciously aware of the feeling, the amygdala has already been at work for several milliseconds. It moved before you knew you were moving. What is remarkable is how rarely this process causes fear. Most of the time, when people describe the feeling of being watched, they use words like strange or odd or a little funny. Not frightening, just curious. Because the brain, in its wisdom, knows the difference between a signal worth urgent attention and one that simply says, "Look around. Something is here." There is a word researchers sometimes use for this feeling: hypervigilance. But that word carries too much weight for what we are describing tonight. Tonight, we are talking about something much softer, a gentle awareness, a kind of social sonar that your mind uses to navigate the world of other people, and sometimes to navigate the world even when other people are not there at all. Because here is one of the most fascinating things science has discovered about this sensation. It does not require an actual observer. Your brain can generate the feeling of being watched entirely on its own, using only patterns it has learned over a lifetime of being among other people. You have been watched so many times, in so many moments, that your mind now knows what being watched feels like before it confirms whether or not it is true. Think of it like a song you know so well that you can hear it in your mind without any music playing. Your brain has learned the melody of observation, and sometimes, in the quiet of an ordinary evening, it plays a few soft notes of that melody, and you feel it, real as anything, even in an empty room. This is not an error. It is not a glitch or a malfunction. It is your mind practicing something important. It is your nervous system keeping itself ready. It is your ancient, brilliant brain doing exactly what it was designed to do, and doing it with extraordinary grace. And as you breathe in slowly now, you might notice how peaceful that understanding is. Your mind is always watching over you. It is always softly listening. Even now, even in this quiet moment, it is gently, faithfully there. If you are enjoying this so far, we would love it if you left a comment below, even just a word or two about how you are feeling. And if you find this kind of story helps you rest, please give it a like. It means the world to us here on the Sleepy Science Channel. Long before humans built cities or lit fires, they lived in a world where being seen by something unseen was a matter of real importance. Not because the world was dangerous in the way we sometimes imagine it, but because staying aware of other creatures, of other people, of the shifting social landscape around you was how you stayed connected, how you stayed safe, how you stayed alive. Your ancestors were deeply, beautifully social beings, and the feeling of being watched was woven into the very fabric of their daily experience. Scientists call this the gaze detection system, and it is one of the most finely tuned perceptual tools the human brain has ever developed. Your eyes, even without your conscious direction, are constantly picking up information about where other eyes are pointing. You can tell with remarkable accuracy whether someone across a room is looking at you or at something just past your shoulder. You can sense a direct gaze even when the person is in your peripheral vision, even when you're not consciously looking at them at all. Studies have shown that people can detect a direct gaze at distances of up to 30 feet with accuracy significantly better than chance. And the brain responds to direct eye contact within milliseconds, faster than you can form a thought about it. The feeling arrives before the reasoning does. You know someone is looking at you before you know how you know. There is a small region of the brain nestled in the temporal lobe called the superior temporal sulcus, and it is devoted almost entirely to processing social information, faces, gestures, the direction of another person's attention. When someone looks directly at you, this region lights up in a very particular way. It is one of the most reliably activated regions in all of social neuroscience, and it activates even when the gaze is only implied, even when you imagine it, even when you feel it without confirming it. This is part of why the feeling of being watched can seem so real even in an empty room. Your superior temporal sulcus is so well trained, so sensitively calibrated to the idea of another person's attention that it can fire in response to very minimal signals. A shadow moving in a certain way, a sound with a particular rhythm, a change in the quality of silence. And here is something truly lovely about this. The same system that detects when others are watching you is also the system you use to understand other people's perspectives, to imagine what they might be thinking, to feel quietly and naturally what it is like to be someone else. The feeling of being watched and the capacity for deep human empathy share the same neural roots. They grew from the same ancient soil. So, when you feel watched, you are touching something that connects you to every person who has ever lived. Every human who has ever walked through a world full of other humans, reading their attention, responding to their presence, navigating the invisible currents of social life with this same delicate, wordless sense. Your body knows how to do this without being taught. You were born knowing. Newborn babies, just hours old, will preferentially look at faces rather than objects, and will respond differently to a direct gaze than to one that is averted. The gaze detection system is not learned. It arrives with you. Let that settle for a moment. From the very first hours of your life, your mind was already tuned to the presence of others, already listening for the soft frequency of human attention, already, in its own infant way, reaching toward the world of people that would surround and sustain you for the rest of your life. Breathe in gently. Notice how your body feels right now, heavy maybe, or soft, or pleasantly still. Your gaze detection system is resting tonight. It has done its work, and the only presence here is the one that means you well. There is a phenomenon that researchers study with great fascination, and it has a name that sounds almost poetic: the watched pot effect. Not the old saying about boiling water, something different. This is the observation that when people believe they are being observed, they behave differently, even when no actual observer is present. They sit up a little straighter. They are slightly more careful with their words. They work a little harder at whatever task is in front of them. The mere belief, the soft, unverified feeling of being watched, is enough to change behavior in measurable, consistent ways. Psychologists discovered this with a very simple experiment. They placed an image of a pair of eyes, just a photograph, just eyes printed on paper, in a common room where people came to help themselves to coffee. And they found that when the eyes were watching, people were significantly more likely to pay for their coffee honestly and to clean up after themselves. No one told them to. No one asked. The eyes were not real, and yet the brain responded to them as though they were. This is because your social brain does not always distinguish clearly between a real observer and an implied one. The feeling of being seen, of being witnessed, is powerful enough on its own to activate the same neural pathways that real observation triggers. Your brain is, in a sense, very easily convinced that someone is there, not because it is foolish, but because erring on the side of someone might be watching has, throughout human history, been the safer and more socially harmonious choice. There is a name for this tendency in evolutionary psychology: the hyperactive agency detection device, or HADD. It is the idea that human brains evolved to be slightly oversensitive to signs of other agents, other minds, other presences in our environment. It was better to mistakenly believe a rustling leaf was someone approaching than to be wrong in the other direction. So we developed a system that is, by design, a little too ready to see intention, a little too quick to feel presence. This is why you might feel watched in an empty forest. why a dark house can feel full of presence even when you know it is not, why a photograph of a stranger's eyes can make you stand up straighter and be kinder. Your brain's agency detector is doing its job, a job so old and so deeply ingrained that it runs beneath conscious thought, beneath language, beneath the part of you that checks facts and draws conclusions. And here is something worth sitting with for a moment. This same oversensitivity is part of what makes humans spiritual. It is part of what leads us to feel that the world is full of meaning, that we are never quite alone, that something larger than ourselves is sometimes softly paying attention. The feeling of being watched in its deepest form may be one of the quiet roots of the human sense of wonder. Scientists who study this do so with real tenderness, because what they are touching is not just neuroscience. It is the very ground of what it means to be human, to be a creature who feels witnessed, to be a being who orients naturally toward the presence of others, even when others are not there. Outside your window tonight, the world is doing what it always does, turning slowly, breathing in the way that worlds breathe, going about its quiet work. And here you are, inside it, a warm and astonishingly complex mind that has been sensing presence, reading the air, and listening to the invisible frequency of other people since the very moment you arrived. We have a lovely playlist of sleepy science stories that you might enjoy exploring after this one. Feel free to check it out when you are ready. But for now, stay right here. There is much more to discover, and we are moving slowly tonight, the way all good nighttime things should move. Your eyes are doing something extraordinary right now, even if they are closed. Even in darkness, even in rest, they are held in a delicate muscular suspension, ready. The human eye is one of the most socially expressive organs in the natural world. The whites of your eyes, the sclera, are uniquely visible among primates, and scientists believe this is not an accident. Having visible whites around your iris allows others to see exactly where your gaze is directed. It is a form of social transparency built into your anatomy that says, you can always know where I am looking. You can always know where my attention is. This transparency works in two directions. Because your eyes reveal your attention, you have also evolved to be extraordinarily sensitive to the direction of other people's eyes. The superior temporal sulcus, which we visited earlier, has neurons that respond specifically to the direction of another person's gaze. These neurons fire differently for looking at me versus looking just past me versus looking away. They are fine-tuned instruments, and they have been playing their quiet music inside your head your entire life. What is remarkable is that gaze direction affects you even from photographs, even from paintings. The experience of being watched by a portrait is so consistent, so widely reported across cultures, that art historians have written about it for centuries. There is a reason certain paintings seem to follow you with their eyes. It is not magic. It is neuroscience. The same gaze detection system that reads the eyes of a real person in the room with you reads the painted eyes on a canvas with much the same response. Scientists tested this with brain imaging. When subjects viewed faces with direct gazes versus averted gazes, the faces with direct gazes produced reliably stronger activation in social processing regions, even when the subjects knew the faces were only photographs. The brain knows what it knows, and what it knows is, those eyes are looking at me. There is a gentler version of this that many people experience with animals. The steady gaze of a cat or a dog can feel almost eloquent, as though they are communicating something specific and important. And in a sense, they are. Gaze, among social animals, carries real information. It signals interest, attention, intention. Your brain reads animal gaze with some of the same sensitivity it brings to human gaze, because the fundamental language of eyes predates the human species by millions of years. Even insects use gaze-like signals. Certain butterflies and moths have large eye-shaped patterns on their wings, not because butterflies evolved to have eyes on their wings, but because birds and small predators have such a strong, ancient response to eye-like shapes that these patterns evolved specifically to trigger that response. The eye shape in the natural world is one of the oldest and most powerful signals that exists. It says, there is a mind here, there is attention here, there is something that sees. And when your brain, in a quiet room, generates the feeling of being watched, it is reaching back into this long, layered history. It is drawing on millions of years of creatures reading other creatures, of eyes responding to eyes, of social minds navigating social worlds. You are, in that moment, the temporary home of something very ancient, a feeling that has been traveling through the generations since long before the first human word was spoken. Let your breathing slow a little more now. Let your jaw soften. There is nowhere to be tonight except here in the warm company of this story. Your gaze detection system can rest. The only thing watching over you right now is the quiet of the evening. And that is a very gentle thing to be watched by indeed. One of the most curious features of the feeling of being watched is that it often comes with a directional component. Not just someone is there, but someone is there, behind me, to the left. You have probably noticed this. The feeling has a geometry. It points somewhere. And this is one of the things that fascinates researchers most, because it suggests that the brain is not simply generating a vague emotional response. It is actually doing something that resembles sensing. How does it do this? The honest answer from science is, we are still learning. But there are several beautiful hypotheses. One involves what researchers call microsignals, tiny, below-conscious inputs that your nervous system continuously processes without alerting your thinking mind. Changes in air pressure, subtle sounds below the threshold of conscious hearing, the faintest shifts in light or shadow, the warmth of another person's body, which can be detected at closer ranges than most people realize. Your skin is covered in sensors, not just the sensors you consciously use for temperature, for pressure, but thousands of other tiny receptors that feed information upward through the nervous system without ever becoming a clear, labeled thought. These sensors form a kind of diffuse, ambient awareness of the physical environment around you. And they can, under the right conditions, contribute to the feeling of presence of someone nearby in ways that your conscious mind then interprets as someone is watching me. There is a beautiful piece of research from the field of social neuroscience that speaks to this directly. Scientists studied people who had damage to specific areas of their visual cortex, damage that meant they could not consciously see things in part of their visual field. And yet, these individuals could still detect with better than chance accuracy when a face was present in their blind spot. When asked how they knew, they said things like, "I just had a feeling." The information was entering their nervous system and influencing their sense of presence, even when it could not enter their consciousness as a clear image. This phenomenon is called blind sight, and it suggests that much of what we call intuition is actually real sensory information that has been processed below the level of awareness. This is part of why the feeling of being watched so often seems impossible to explain. You were being given real information. Your nervous system was doing real work. The signal was genuine. It simply traveled a different route than your everyday perceptions, passing through older, quieter pathways that do not produce images or sounds, only feelings. Think about how many times in your life you have had the sense that something was different, that the atmosphere had shifted, that you needed to pay attention, and then turned around and found that you were right. Not always, but often enough to be more than coincidence. Your nervous system was reading something real. Your body knows things your mind has not yet caught up to. This is the kind of knowledge that cannot be put into words, not entirely. It lives in the body rather than the brain, in the sensing rather than the thinking. It is one of the things that makes human experience so layered, so rich, so full of dimensions that language can only approximate. You are always receiving more information than you know. You are always already deeper in the world than your conscious thoughts reveal. And on a night like this, when you are still and quiet and resting, that deeper knowing can simply exist without you having to do anything about it. You do not have to understand it. You do not have to explain it. You can simply lie here, aware that you are a remarkably sensitive instrument, and let all that quiet sensing slowly, gradually settle into sleep. There is a condition in medicine, gentle and strange and ultimately rather illuminating, called Capgras syndrome, in which a person feels as though someone close to them has been replaced by an identical imposter. The emotional recognition that should accompany a familiar face has somehow been disconnected from the visual recognition. The person looks right, but does not feel right, and the brain, finding this mismatch, reaches for the only explanation that makes sense to it. This is not really them. We mention this not because it relates to anything troubling, but because it illuminates something beautiful about how the brain processes social presence. The feeling of someone being here is not just a visual thing. It is not simply the result of seeing a face. It is a whole-body, multi-system event, a convergence of visual information, emotional memory, contextual cues, and something researchers call familiarity signaling. When all those systems align, you feel with certainty, yes, this person is real, is here, is known to me. When you feel watched, a softer version of this process is at work. Your brain is assembling partial signals, incomplete cues, below threshold inputs, ambient information, and reaching for the most likely explanation. And the most likely explanation for a social creature who has spent their entire life among other people is often, there is someone nearby paying attention to me. This is called social priming by some researchers, and it means that having been around people all your life, your brain is, in a sense, preloaded with the expectation of social presence. The default interpretation of many ambiguous signals is a social one. A sound that might be caused by the wind or by a person is more readily attributed to a person. A shape in your peripheral vision is more quickly read as a face. A change in the atmosphere is more naturally interpreted as the arrival of another consciousness. This is not paranoia. This is social fluency. A mind that is deeply, naturally oriented toward other people will tend to see people, to sense people, more readily than one that is not. And deeply social minds are generally happier, more creative, more resilient. The same sensitivity that makes you feel watched in an empty room is the sensitivity that makes you an attentive friend, a perceptive partner, a person who notices when someone is not quite themselves. There is another dimension to this, one that researchers have explored with great care. The feeling of being watched is particularly likely in situations of uncertainty, when the environment is ambiguous, when you cannot fully see or hear what is around you, when you're in an unfamiliar place. This makes perfect sense. Uncertainty is exactly the condition under which you most need to know whether another agent is present. Your brain increases the sensitivity of its social detection system precisely when the stakes of getting it wrong are highest. And so, in a dark room, in a forest at dusk, in a quiet house where the sounds are unfamiliar, the feeling of presence can be stronger. Not because you are more likely to be right, but because your brain is being appropriately cautious. It is doing its job with exactly the right level of care. You might be feeling very peaceful right now reading this, and if you have a moment, we would love for you to drop a comment. Tell us where in the world you're listening from tonight, or simply say hello. Every comment reminds us why we do this work, and it means so much. But now, let us return to the story, because there is still so much quiet wonder left to explore. Let us talk about something that sounds at first like magic, and turns out to be pure, beautiful science. It is called the gaze cueing effect, and it works like this. If you show someone a face that is looking in a particular direction, their attention will automatically, involuntarily follow that gaze. Not because they decide to follow it, not because they think it would be a good idea, but because the brain is wired to do this, as automatically as your leg swings when the doctor taps your knee. In study after study, people respond to faces with averted gazes by shifting their own attention in the direction the face is looking, even when they have been explicitly told that the face direction is not predictive, not meaningful, just random. They know it does not matter, and still they follow. The gaze cueing effect is that deep, that automatic, that ancient. This tells us something remarkable. Human attention is in part a shared and social phenomenon. Where others look, we look. What others attend to, we attend to. Our minds are, at a very fundamental level, tuned to the attentional states of other minds. We are built for joint attention, for shared focus, for the experience of looking together at the same thing. This is, among other things, why pointing works. A dog can follow a human pointing gesture in ways that even our closest primate relatives cannot easily do, because dogs have co-evolved with humans and learned to read our attention. But humans are born doing this. A 9-month-old baby, not yet able to walk or talk, will follow your pointing gesture and look where you are pointing. They will then look back at your face to confirm that you are looking at the same thing. Joint attention, the experience of being focused together on something, is one of the earliest and most foundational social acts a human being performs. And so, when you feel watched, you are touching one end of this deep social circuit. You are not simply feeling observed, you are feeling the invisible thread of someone else's attention, that thread that connects minds, that has been connecting minds for as long as minds have existed. Even when that thread is only imagined, only inferred, only softly generated by your own brain, in a quiet room, you are still touching the same ancient circuitry, still feeling something that is, at its root, about connection. Researchers who study joint attention sometimes describe it as the earliest form of communication. Before words, before gesture, before language of any kind, there was the simple act of two creatures looking at the same thing and knowing in some wordless way that they were together in that looking. It is one of the oldest forms of intimacy the world has known. And perhaps that is part of why the feeling of being watched, even when slightly surprising, does not usually feel threatening. It feels like contact, like connection, like the soft tap of another mind against the window of your awareness. Your nervous system recognizes it as something familiar, something known, something that in the long history of your species has more often meant companionship than anything else. You are not alone in this, not in this moment, and not in the history that brought you here. You are part of an unbroken chain of social creatures who have felt this same feeling, reached back through the same circuitry, and found there the same quiet reassurance that another mind is near, that attention is flowing between you and the world, that you are a part of something larger than yourself. Let your body be heavy now. Let your thoughts move slowly like boats on very still water. There is nothing to figure out tonight. Everything is already in place. The night is doing its work, and you are doing yours, which is simply to rest. There is a lovely and somewhat mind-bending finding in the psychology of gaze that we should spend some time with tonight. It is this: people consistently overestimate the size of the cone of gaze, that is, the angular range within which they feel someone is looking directly at them. If someone is looking at you, you will feel their gaze as direct even when they are actually looking several degrees to the side of your face. You are more sensitive to being looked at than the physics of eye direction would strictly justify. Researchers believe this may be another evolutionary inheritance. If you were going to make a mistake about whether someone was looking at you or not, it was safer to err toward yes. Better to feel watched when you were not than to miss the moment when you were. And so, the brain built in a small margin of error in the generous direction. A little extra sensitivity, a little extra, yes, a little more awareness of gaze than the raw data strictly supports. This margin of error is part of what creates the feeling of being watched in ambiguous situations. Not just when someone is clearly staring at you, but in the gray zone, when a person's gaze is close to yours, when a photograph's printed eyes are angled slightly, when a window reflects something that might be a face, when the light is dim and shapes are uncertain. In all these gray zones, your brain leans toward, yes, there is a gaze here, because that lean, historically, has been the wise and safe one. And there is something else. The feeling of being watched activates what psychologists call self-awareness. When you feel observed, you become more conscious of yourself, your posture, your expression, your behavior. You become, in a sense, a little more present, a little more here. This is why actors and performers often describe the feeling of a watching audience as energizing, as focusing, as somehow making them more fully themselves. The gaze of others, even imagined, draws us into sharper presence. Philosophers have written about this for a long time. The idea that consciousness partly exists in the space between self and other, that we become more fully ourselves in the awareness of being witnessed. There is something deep here, something that science is only beginning to find language for. The feeling of being watched is not just a detection of another mind. It may also be a discovery of your own. There is a researcher named Michael Graziano who has spent decades studying how the brain represents the space around the body, what he calls parapersonal space, the invisible bubble of personal territory that surrounds each of us. This space is mapped in the brain with surprising precision. Neurons in the premotor cortex respond to things near the body even before those things touch it. A hand approaching your face, an object moving toward your shoulder. Your brain maintains a continuous, dynamic map of what is near you and how close. When you feel watched, part of what you may be sensing is a change in this peripersonal space. Another mind, another attention, another presence, even if only implied, may subtly alter the quality of that space in ways your nervous system detects before your consciousness catches up. The map of your body in the world shifts slightly. Something has entered your radius, and the brain, faithful as always, reports. Something is here. You are very safe right now. Your parapersonal space is peaceful. The only thing near you is the soft night, and the only presence is the one you carry with you always, your own warm, quietly breathing self. Dreams are full of being watched, not nightmares, just ordinary dreams, the ones that drift through the mind during the deep hours of sleep. In many of them, there is a quality of observation, of audience, of being seen. Psychologists who study dream content have noted this across cultures and across centuries of recorded dreams. The feeling of a gaze, of a presence, of being in some way witnessed is one of the most common elements of the dreaming mind. This makes a kind of intuitive sense. Dreams are built from the same materials as waking life, the same memories, the same fears and joys, the same relational experiences. And in waking life, being observed is one of the most fundamental experiences we have. So of course, the dreaming mind returns to it, rehearses it, plays with it in the soft theater of the sleeping brain. But there is something more interesting here. The brain regions involved in processing social information remain somewhat active during sleep. During REM sleep, the stage most associated with dreaming, the amygdala and related social emotional areas show sustained activity. The sleeping brain is still, in some sense, tending to its social world, still processing relationships, still working through the emotional textures of connection and separation, of attention and inattention. Some researchers believe that dreaming about being watched or about other people's eyes, other people's attention, is part of how the brain rehearses and consolidates social knowledge. You practice in the safe space of sleep what it feels like to be seen. You run the software of social awareness through its paces, updating it, refining it, preparing it for the next day's waking life. This means that even your dreams are, in a way, acts of social intelligence. Even in sleep, you are a creature of relationship. Even unconscious, you are a being who orients toward others, who cares about attention, who finds meaning in the experience of being witnessed. It is woven all the way down through every layer of you. There is a very old study, one of the first systematic investigations of the feeling of being watched, that was conducted in the early 20th century by a researcher named E.B. Titchener. He was interested in whether people could reliably sense when others were looking at the back of their head. His conclusions were mixed, and the study has been debated ever since. But what is most striking, looking back at it now, is how universal the experience was that he was trying to study. Everyone he interviewed knew exactly what he was talking about. Everyone had felt it. The experience needed no explanation. It was simply part of being human. More than a century later, we know much more about why. We know about the amygdala and the superior temporal sulcus. We know about gaze detection and social priming and parapersonal space. We know that the brain is, at its core, a social organ, designed not just to process the physical world, but to navigate the world of minds. And we know that the feeling of being watched is one of the most ancient and exquisite expressions of that social intelligence. Isn't it something to have been born with all of this already inside you? To have arrived in the world already wired for this extraordinary attunement? You did not have to learn to be sensitive to the presence of others. You already were. You have always been, from the very beginning of you. Rest in that for a moment. Let it be a comfort. We want to take a small, quiet detour tonight into mirrors. The experience of looking at your own reflection is one of the most unusual things a human mind does, and it is surprisingly connected to the feeling of being watched. When you look in a mirror, you are activating your social brain. You are, in a very real sense, becoming your own observer. Psychologists use mirror tests to study self-awareness in animals. Very few species will recognize themselves in a mirror. Great apes, elephants, dolphins, and a handful of others have passed the test reliably. Humans, of course, recognize themselves almost immediately and with great sophistication. But what is fascinating is how the mirror changes behavior. When a mirror is placed near people working alone, they work more carefully. They are more honest. They are kinder to others who enter the space. The mirror, like the photograph of eyes in the coffee room, generates the feeling of being watched, this time by oneself. There is a concept in psychology called objective self-awareness, the state of having your attention directed at yourself rather than outward at the world. Normally, you are the subject of your own experience, looking out at everything. But in moments of self-consciousness, of reflection, you become also the object. You see yourself from the outside, the way others see you. And this shift, as uncomfortable as it can sometimes be, is also one of the most important things the human mind can do. It is the foundation of empathy, of moral reasoning, of the capacity to understand how your actions affect others. The feeling of being watched in this light is closely related to the capacity for self-reflection, to sense that another mind might be present, that your actions, your expressions, your presence in the world might be visible to another consciousness, is to step for a moment into the perspective of another. And that stepping is one of the most distinctly human things you can do. Infants begin to show signs of self-recognition in mirrors around 18 months of age. Before that, they may look at the mirror with curiosity or even friendliness toward the other baby they see, but without recognizing themselves. The development of mirror self-recognition is closely linked with the development of other forms of self-awareness, with understanding that others have mental states different from your own, with being able to feel embarrassed or proud or shy, with the beginnings of that complex inner life that will eventually become fully, richly you. So the feeling of being watched is, in a deep way, about the development of the self. Every time you sense the presence of another consciousness, you are also touching the boundary of your own. You are briefly aware of yourself from the outside, aware that you have an outside at all, that you exist in space, that others can perceive you. This is one of the quieter forms of wonder that the human mind is capable of, and it is available to you in any ordinary moment, in any quiet room, simply by noticing that soft and familiar feeling. Someone might be watching. Tonight, though, no one is asking you to be aware of yourself from the outside. Tonight, you are simply invited to sink inward, to be purely the subject of your own experience, to be just here, just breathing, just warm, and resting in the soft fact of your own existence. Do you have a favorite topic you would like us to explore on the Sleepy Science channel? Leave it in the comments. We read every single one, and your suggestions have shaped so many of our stories. You might also enjoy our playlist of other bedtime science stories. But for now, we are still here together, moving slowly through this beautiful night. There is a theory in evolutionary biology called the social brain hypothesis, and it is one of the most remarkable ideas in all of science. It proposes that the extraordinary size and complexity of the human brain, far larger than any other animal of comparable body size, evolved not primarily to deal with the physical world, but to deal with the social world, to track relationships, to remember who helped whom and who did what, to anticipate how others would behave, to navigate the astonishing complexity of living among other large-brained, socially sensitive, strategically thinking creatures. The anthropologist Robin Dunbar, who developed much of this hypothesis, found a striking relationship between the size of the neocortex in different primate species and the typical social group size of those species. The bigger the neocortex, the larger the social group the animal tends to live in. And humans, with their remarkably large neocortexes, live in and track the largest social groups of all. Dunbar proposed that the comfortable limit of close social relationships for humans is around 150. This number, now called Dunbar's number, keeps appearing across human history in the size of village communities, military companies, church congregations, and many other natural human groupings. But here is the part that connects most directly to what we are exploring tonight. Dunbar also studied how much of human conversation is devoted to social topics, to talking about other people, to sharing information about relationships, to what researchers somewhat unglamorously call social gossip. The answer, across cultures and contexts, is around 60 to 65%. Most of human conversation, most of the time, is about people. Who is with whom, who has done what, who can be trusted, who is feeling what. Your mind is essentially a social relationship tracking device that also happens to be able to do mathematics and build cathedrals. And so, the feeling of being watched is not a minor or peripheral thing. It is not a side effect or a quirk. It is an expression of what your brain was built to do. Your mind is, in its core purpose, devoted to monitoring the social world, to keeping track of others, to sensing their attention and their intentions, to maintaining the web of relationships that has always been the primary environment of the human animal. When you feel watched, you are in the deepest sense doing the thing your mind was made for. There is something quietly moving about this. The feeling that has probably at some point made you turn around in an empty room, that has made you glance over your shoulder in the quiet dark, that has given you that small shiver of curious awareness. That feeling is the surface expression of the most extraordinary organ that evolution has ever produced, doing its most fundamental work. You are a social creature of almost unimaginable complexity, and right now, in this still and peaceful hour, you do not need to use any of that complexity for anything at all. The social world is resting. The web of relationships is holding itself together without your attention. Everyone who matters to you is, in their own way, somewhere safe and resting just as you are. Let your mind be a quiet place now. Let the social tracking and the gaze monitoring and the relationship processing all slow to a murmur. There is nothing to monitor tonight. There is only this: the gentle dark, the soft weight of your body, the slow breathing in and out, the world doing its nighttime work around you. Let us explore something that researchers discovered almost by accident, through studies of a very different kind. Scientists studying patients with neurological conditions began to notice something peculiar. Certain patients, people with damage to specific parts of the brain, or people experiencing certain neurological events, would report with great clarity and certainty that there was a person in the room with them. They would sometimes describe this presence in detail, standing in a certain corner, moving in a certain way, having a particular quality of stillness. And when researchers looked, there was no one there. This experience is called the felt presence. And what makes it so interesting scientifically is that it tells us something about how the brain normally generates the feeling of presence in the first place. Because what these patients were experiencing was, in all likelihood, the brain's social detection system working without its usual calibration, generating the output of felt presence, without the corresponding input, an actual person. Like a radio picking up a station that isn't broadcasting. The brain regions associated with this experience overlap significantly with those involved in normal social perception. The regions that process self-other distinctions, that monitor parapersonal space, that generate the feeling of another mind being near. When these regions misfire, or when the usual checks and balances of the social perception system are disrupted, the brain can produce the feeling of presence as a pure internal event, unconnected to any external cause. This is, in a way, the most direct evidence we have for something that we have been circling around all evening. The feeling of being watched, of presence being near, is not simply a passive reception of information from the outside world. It is, at least in part, a construction. The brain builds the feeling of presence, using the information available to it, and that building process can produce outputs that are more or less accurate, depending on conditions. On a good night, in a clear and well-calibrated state, your social perception system produces accurate outputs. There is someone there, and you feel there is. There is no one, and you feel there is no one. But in the gray zones, in tiredness, in uncertainty, in sensory ambiguity, in the particular quality of late-night quiet, the system may produce a softer, more tenuous output, the whisper of presence that might or might not correspond to anything external. And this is, we think, quite beautiful. It means that the feeling of being watched is not just a detection, but a creation. Your mind is, in these moments, generating something, assembling a social perception out of fragments and signals and tendencies, stitching together the feeling of another awareness from the cloth of your own extraordinary brain. You are, in the most literal sense, creating the sense of company. There is a philosopher named Edmund Husserl who wrote about what he called intersubjectivity, the experience of knowing that other minds exist, of sensing the presence of other consciousnesses in the world. He thought this was one of the most foundational features of human experience, one that preceded and made possible all other forms of knowledge and connection. You know you are not alone in the world, not because you can prove it logically, but because you feel it, because the feeling of other minds is built into you as deeply as the feeling of your own. And even in an empty room, even in the stillest and most solitary hour of the night, that feeling can bloom softly up from the depths of your own astonishing mind. A reminder, perhaps, that you are never entirely alone, that you carry the whole social world inside you, and that it is always, very softly, present. There is a last piece of the puzzle that we want to lay down gently tonight, like the final stone in a mosaic that has been slowly taking shape. It has to do with oxytocin, sometimes called the bonding hormone or the trust molecule, though those names do not quite capture how subtle and multifaceted it actually is. Oxytocin is a neuropeptide, a small molecule produced in the hypothalamus and released into the bloodstream and the brain in response to certain social stimuli: physical touch, eye contact, the presence of familiar people, moments of trust or warmth or connection. When oxytocin is released, it modulates the activity of the amygdala, the social processing regions, the areas involved in attention and presence detection. It shifts the whole system toward openness, toward attunement, toward heightened sensitivity to social signals. And here is something remarkable. Low levels of oxytocin are associated with heightened sensitivity to the feeling of being watched. When oxytocin is high, when you are in the company of people you trust, when you feel safe and connected, the social detection system runs more quietly, more efficiently, with less noise. But when oxytocin is low, when you are isolated, when you are uncertain, when you are in unfamiliar territory, the system becomes more sensitive, more alert, more likely to produce that feeling of presence, of watching, of being observed. This is, again, exactly the right design. When you are alone or in uncertain company, you most need your social detection system working at high sensitivity. And so, the chemistry shifts to make it so. The body looks after you in ways you never asked for, ways you probably never even noticed, ways that have been operating on your behalf your entire life. Oxytocin also plays a role in something else that connects beautifully to everything we have been discussing tonight. It is involved in the experience of feeling safe, of feeling that the world is, at its core, a trustworthy place, that the presences around you, real or sensed, external or internal, are benevolent, are gentle, are on your side. When oxytocin is high, even the feeling of being watched changes in quality. Instead of a shiver of uncertainty, it becomes something warmer, something more like being held within the awareness of someone who cares. The same neural circuitry, the same social detection system, but tilted by this single small molecule toward warmth rather than wariness. You have probably felt both versions of this in your life. The uncertain version, the slight unease in an empty room, the sense of unseen attention that is not quite comfortable. And the warm version, the feeling of being known, of being seen, of existing within the caring awareness of another person. These are not entirely different experiences. They are the same experience in different chemical conditions, the same ancient circuitry playing different music. Tonight, the chemistry is tilted toward warmth. The night is safe. The presences around you, however many there may be, however imagined or real, are friendly ones. Your body knows this. Your nervous system has already checked, and it has reported back in the language of quiet ease that everything is well. Let that ease spread through you now, through your shoulders, your chest, your hands, through the long muscles of your back and the soft places behind your knees. Let it go all the way down to your feet and all the way up to the crown of your head. Everything is well. Everything has always been well. And now, gently, it is time to rest. We are near the end of our journey tonight, and we want to take a moment to simply appreciate where we have been. We started with a feeling, a small, ordinary, quietly remarkable feeling that almost every human being has had at some point in their life. The sense of being watched, the soft certainty of a presence nearby, and we have followed it carefully and gently through the layers of science that illuminate it. We found it in the amygdala, that ancient, faithful watchman, always scanning, always softly attending. We found it in the superior temporal sulcus, the region devoted to reading the direction of other eyes, tuned to social signals since before you were born. We found it in the gaze detection system, that exquisitely calibrated instrument that lets you feel a direct gaze across a room, from a photograph, from a painting whose subject has been gone for centuries. We found it in the hyperactive agency detection device, the beautiful oversensitivity that makes us see minds everywhere. That is the same root from which human wonder and spiritual feeling grow. We found it in parapersonal space, in the invisible bubble of your body's awareness that extends out into the air around you and maps the presence of whatever comes near. We found it in social priming, in the way your brain, so thoroughly trained by a lifetime of living among people, defaults to interpreting ambiguous signals in social terms. We found it in the felt presence phenomenon, where the brain builds the experience of another mind purely from its own internal resources. We found it in oxytocin and in the chemistry of safety, in the way the whole system tilts toward warmth or wariness, depending on whether you feel connected or alone. We found it in the social brain hypothesis, in the idea that the enormous complexity of the human mind was built primarily for the management of social life, for relationship, for attunement, for the endless and extraordinary task of knowing other minds. And we found it, perhaps most beautifully, in joint attention, in the most ancient and foundational social act there is, the act of looking together, of sharing a gaze, of being present with another consciousness in the world. That act is woven into you from before language, before memory, before your first clear thought. It is as basic as breathing. If you would like to explore more of these gentle science journeys, we have a whole playlist waiting for you. Stories about how memory works while you sleep, about the science of comfort, about why music makes us feel the way it does. You can find the playlist linked nearby, and we hope you will visit it when you are ready. And if this story has given you something tonight, a moment of peace, a feeling of wonder, a question you want to think about, please leave us a like and a comment. It matters so much, and it helps more people find their way here. But right now, we are not going anywhere. We are right here, in the quiet of this story, in the last few steps of this night's exploration. And we want to end not with a summary or a lesson, but with simply this: a feeling, the feeling of lying here and knowing that your brain is remarkable, that your body is trustworthy, that the sensitivity you carry, the sensitivity to other minds, to invisible signals, to the presence of consciousness in the world, is not a quirk or a glitch, but a gift. One of the most extraordinary gifts the long story of evolution has ever produced. You feel the world deeply. You sense what others cannot always name. You carry in the neural architecture of your astonishing mind the accumulated wisdom of every social creature that ever lived, every animal that read the gaze of another, every early human who felt the soft certainty of a watching presence and turned to find their family near. You are the inheritor of all of that, and tonight you get to rest in it. The night outside is very still now. Whatever sounds were there before, the distant movement of traffic, the occasional voice, the small creaks and sighs of the building around you, they have settled into something gentler. The kind of quiet that has texture to it, that feels almost like a material thing, like a soft blanket laid across the world. You are warm. Your body has been breathing this whole time, without any instruction from you, without any effort or attention required. In and out, steady and slow, the same rhythm that has accompanied every moment of your life, even the ones you were not thinking about at all. Your heart is doing the same, faithful, constant, soft as a drum being played in a room far away. And somewhere, deep in the social regions of your brain, the gaze detection system is resting, the amygdala is quiet, the superior temporal sulcus is still. All those beautiful, ancient, sensitive instruments that have been scanning and reading and attending on your behalf since before you were conscious of any of it. They are at peace now. There is nothing to detect tonight. There is no gaze to read, no presence to identify, no social signal requiring a response. There is only this: the weight of your body against the softness beneath you, the temperature of the air against your skin, the slow, reliable fact of your own breathing. You have spent this evening visiting one of the most intimate rooms in the house of the human mind, the room where social intelligence lives, where presence is felt, where the ancient, wordless knowledge of other minds quietly does its work. It is a beautiful room, a warm room, a room that has been part of being human for so long that no one can say when it was first built. And now that room is resting. You do not need to understand anything tonight. You do not need to remember what we discussed, or hold on to the names or the studies or the theories. You can let all of it drift away, the way sound drifts away when you are nearly asleep, still there at the edges, but no longer demanding your attention, no longer needing to be held. Let your thoughts become slow. Let them become soft. Let them become the kind of thoughts that do not quite form into words. Impressions rather than ideas, warmth rather than knowledge, sensation rather than understanding. You are somewhere safe. Whatever watches over you tonight does so gently, without expectation, without demand. The same world that built your social brain, that wired you for the feeling of presence and connection and the warmth of being known. That world is here now, all around you. It has never not been here. It will not stop being here. And you, in the middle of it, warm and heavy and quietly breathing, you are exactly where you're supposed to be. There is a quality of attention that scientists have spent a great deal of time studying, and it has a name that is almost too simple for what it describes: sustained attention. The ability to maintain focus on a single thing, an environment, a person, a sound, over an extended period of time. Most people, when asked to hold their attention on something without moving or speaking, can manage it for roughly 20 minutes before the mind begins to wander. But there are exceptions to this, and they are instructive. Hunters in traditional societies, people who have spent their lives learning to read landscapes, to detect movement at great distances, to remain still for long periods while watching and waiting, develop forms of sustained attention that are qualitatively different from what the average urban brain can manage. They scan the environment in a particular way, not focusing on any one point, but maintaining a broad, soft, distributed awareness across the whole visual field. This is sometimes called wide-angle vision, and it is associated with a very different brain state than the narrow, focused attention most people use for reading or conversation. What is fascinating is that this wide-angle, distributed awareness is also the state most associated with the feeling of being watched, both in the watcher and in the one being watched. When someone is paying that soft, broad, peripheral kind of attention to you, your nervous system may detect it differently than it detects a hard, fixed stare. The stare you can locate and name. The broad, ambient watching is harder to pin down. It registers as a feeling rather than a sight, a warmth or a weight rather than a direction. This may be part of why the feeling of being watched is so often described as coming from behind or from the periphery, from somewhere you cannot quite see. The brain, receiving inputs from peripheral visual processing and ambient sensory channels, translates these into a spatial impression, not I see someone over there, but the quality of the space behind me has changed. A shift in the texture of your environment that your conscious mind then interprets as a gaze. Researchers studying peripheral vision have found that the outer edges of the human visual field are extraordinarily sensitive to motion and to certain configurations of shapes, particularly oval shapes with dark centers, which approximate a face. You do not need to see a face clearly to respond to it. You need only to sense, at the very edge of your awareness, something that is sufficiently face-like. And then your social brain does the rest, filling in the inference, generating the feeling, sending up that soft flag. Someone might be here. This peripheral sensitivity is why certain settings reliably produce the feeling of being watched more than others. Dense forests, where faces and figures might be partially obscured. Crowded places, where the peripheral field is full of movement and ambiguous shapes. Empty rooms with many windows, where each pane of glass potentially holds a reflection or a watching figure. Your nervous system is doing continuous work in all of these environments, evaluating every peripheral input against the question, is there a face here? Is there a gaze? Is there a mind attending to me? And most of the time, the answer is no. Most of the time, the peripheral impression of a face dissolves on closer inspection into a shadow or a pattern or an ordinary object. But the system had to check. It had to go through the process of evaluation because the cost of missing a real face, a real presence, would be too high to accept. Better to check 100 times and find nothing than to miss the one time something is truly there. There is a word in Japanese, maa, that refers to the meaningful quality of negative space, of silence, of the gap between notes or between words. It is the space that gives form meaning. And there is something of that quality in the feeling of being watched, in the gap between someone is here and no one is here, in the moment of checking when your brain has not yet resolved its social detection, that moment of suspension, of openness, of I don't yet know. It is a kind of ma, a meaningful pause in the continuous story your brain tells about the world. You are, right now, in a different kind of ma, the pause between thought and sleep, the space where the day's events are dissolving and the night's deep rest is gathering. Let your peripheral vision rest. Let the edges of your awareness soften. There is nothing at the edges tonight. There is only the warm, central, quiet fact of you, breathing, resting, already beginning to let go. We want to spend some time tonight with something that does not get discussed enough in the science of social perception, the role of sound. Vision tends to dominate our understanding of how we detect other presences because human beings are such visual creatures, but hearing plays a deep and quiet role in the feeling of being watched that is worth exploring with care. Sound travels around corners. It passes through walls. It arrives from directions you cannot see. And the human auditory system is exquisitely calibrated to pick up sounds that carry social information. Breathing, footsteps, the small involuntary sounds a body makes simply by existing in space. You can hear a person in a way that you cannot see them, and the feeling of hearing someone without seeing them is a distinct and interesting experience. Your brain registers it as presence, as an occupied space. In a way, that goes beyond simply locating the sound. Scientists studying auditory scene analysis, the way the brain makes sense of overlapping sounds, have found that humans are particularly adept at something called auditory figure-ground separation, the ability to pick out a single meaningful sound from a background of other sounds. A quiet cough at the back of a room, a soft footstep on a different floor, the controlled, rhythmic quality of someone else's breathing in a space you thought was empty. These sounds have a particular quality, a regularity, a biological signature that your auditory system recognizes even when it cannot consciously name what it is recognizing. And here is something that may surprise you. In some studies, people who report the feeling of being watched in empty rooms have subsequently been found to have perceived, without conscious awareness, sounds that were later identified as belonging to another person. A door that was not quite closed. A heating system that was cycling in a way that resembled rhythmic breathing. In some cases, actual sounds from adjacent rooms that filtered through the walls at frequencies the conscious mind did not register, but the nervous system did. Sound, in other words, was feeding the feeling. The brain was receiving auditory social information and converting it, in the translation, into a sense of visual presence. This cross-modal quality of social perception, the way sound can produce the feeling of being seen, the way a change in light can produce the feeling of being heard, the way the whole social detection system draws from all the senses simultaneously, is one of its most elegant features. It is not a system with a single input channel. It is a convergence device, gathering evidence from everywhere and synthesizing it into a unified social impression. One channel alone might not trigger the feeling, but two channels, or three, or the quiet addition of sensory inputs you cannot even name, and suddenly, clearly, unmistakably, the feeling is there. There is research suggesting that certain infrasound frequencies, very low-frequency sound below the threshold of normal hearing, can produce feelings of unease, a presence, of being watched. These frequencies are produced by some large machinery, by the wind moving through certain architectural spaces, by other environmental sources. Your ear cannot consciously register them, but your body can. The fluid in your inner ear responds. Your chest cavity resonates slightly, and the brain, receiving these signals, translates them into an atmospheric impression, a quality to the space that it then reaches for a social explanation to account for. Researchers who study hauntings, those places where the people consistently report the feeling of presence, of being watched, of not being alone, have found infrasound sources in many of them. Not ghosts, of course, but something real, a vibration in the world that moves through walls and through bodies and registers in the soft and ancient processing layers of the brain as the signature of a presence, of something there. And what this tells us most essentially is that the feeling of being watched is a whole body experience. It is not produced only by the eyes or the brain's visual cortex. It is produced by the skin and the ears and the chest cavity and the inner ear and the peripheral nervous system and the ancient pre-linguistic, pre-rational layers of neural processing that sit beneath everything you consciously know about yourself. You are, all of you, a social sensing instrument. Every cell of you is in some small way listening. Right now, what is your body hearing? the soft sound of air moving, perhaps the distant texture of the world outside, the near silence of a late hour, that particular quality of quiet that belongs only to the deep night. Your own breathing, steady and slow, a sound so familiar you have stopped noticing it. But it is there, the most intimate sound in your world, the one that has accompanied every moment of your existence. Let that sound be a comfort now. Let the fact of your own breathing remind you, you are here, you are safe. The sensing can rest. There is a concept in animal behavior called the predator inspection ritual. And while that phrase sounds quite dramatic, what it describes is something rather tender. When a small animal, a fish, a bird, a mouse, detects the possible presence of a predator, it does not immediately flee. Instead, it often moves toward the potential threat, carefully and slowly, to inspect it, to gather information, to confirm or deny what it suspects. The inspection ritual is an act of courageous curiosity, a willingness to investigate the unknown rather than simply run from it. Humans do something remarkably similar with the feeling of being watched. When the feeling arises, the near universal response is not to freeze or to flee, but to look, to turn around, to glance toward the window or the corner or the dark end of the room, to check. This checking behavior is so deeply ingrained, so universal across cultures and ages that it appears in accounts of human experience going back as far as written records reach. And it tells us something important about the nature of the feeling itself. It is, at its root, a request for information. The feeling says not run, but look. This looking response is coordinated by a region of the brain called the superior colliculus, a small structure in the midbrain that handles the rapid, reflexive reorientation of eyes and head toward points of interest. The superior colliculus acts faster than conscious thought. When a sound or a movement or an ambient signal triggers the social detection system, the superior colliculus can begin rotating the eyes in the direction of interest before the cortex has processed what is happening. You turn before you decide to turn. You look before you know you are looking. This is one of the reasons the response to the feeling of being watched can feel slightly uncanny, as though your body knows something your mind does not yet. Because in a very real sense it does. The subcortical networks that generate the turning response have already processed enough information to determine a direction of interest, while the cortical networks that generate conscious thought are still catching up. By the time you are aware of looking, the looking has already begun. There is a lovely piece of research that speaks to this directly. Scientists set up scenarios where people were asked to look at a display, while in their peripheral vision, a face briefly appeared and then disappeared, too quickly for conscious recognition. Afterwards, people reported no awareness of having seen a face, but their eyes had moved briefly and involuntarily toward the location where the face had appeared. The superior colliculus had registered the face-like stimulus and directed attention toward it, entirely without conscious involvement. The body knew, the mind did not. This speaks to something more general about human social awareness. Much of it is invisible to us. The vast majority of social processing, the continuous monitoring, the ambient scanning, the rapid assessment of facial expressions and gaze directions, and the quality of other people's attention happens below the threshold of conscious experience. You are always doing much more social reading than you know. You are always receiving more information than your conscious mind reports. The feeling of being watched is just the small surface feature of a vast, deep, mostly silent process. Think of an iceberg. The small visible portion above the waterline is your conscious social experience. The thoughts you have about other people, the observations you make, the feelings you notice and can name. Below the waterline, invisible and enormous, is the subconscious social processing that your nervous system is doing every moment of every day. The feeling of being watched, when it surfaces into consciousness, is a single small fragment of that enormous process rising briefly into view. And here is what feels worth holding on to tonight. You are extraordinarily good at something you cannot even see yourself doing. You are a social genius operating almost entirely below your own awareness. The part of you that makes it all happen, that reads the room and senses the air and monitors the quality of attention around you, is not the part that forms sentences and makes decisions. It is something older, quieter, and in its own way, far more sophisticated. You do not need to do anything with this tonight. You do not need to become more aware of your social awareness, or to practice the very thing you are already continuously doing. You only need to let it happen, the way your heart beats and your lungs breathe without being told. The social brain will do its work. It always has. And tonight, it will do that work very quietly, very gently, as you sleep. There is a quality that scientists sometimes call social sensitivity, a dimension of personality that describes how attuned a person is to the emotional states and intentions of others. Some people are very high in this quality. They notice the subtle shift in a friend's expression before the friend has said anything. They sense the change in mood in a room when someone enters or leaves. They feel the emotional texture of a conversation as precisely as others feel temperature. They are, as the poet Keats once described himself, ready to be plunged into the sea of experience. Research has shown that people high in social sensitivity also tend to report the feeling of being watched more frequently. Not because they are imagining things, but because their social detection systems are running at higher sensitivity across the board. Everything that is true of that system, its receptivity to ambient signals, its tendency toward generous interpretation of social cues, its fine-tuning to the frequency of other minds, is truer, more pronounced, more continuously active in highly socially sensitive people. And here is something important. Social sensitivity is correlated with empathy, with creativity, with a heightened ability to understand and inhabit other people's perspectives, with a richer, more textured inner life. High social sensitivity is not a liability. It is an endowment, an unusually rich version of the same gift that all humans carry, the gift of being calibrated to the presence and the inner life of others. If you have ever felt this, if you are someone who feels watched more often than others seem to, who reads rooms and senses shifts, and sometimes simply knows things about other people's inner states without being able to explain how, this is not a vulnerability. It is, in the original and most precise meaning of the word, a sensitivity, a finer instrument, a more sensitive antenna. The world comes through to you in a higher resolution. There is a type of neuron that researchers discovered in the 1990s, first in macaque monkeys and later confirmed in humans, that has captured the imagination of neuroscientists ever since. These are called mirror neurons, and they do something that still astonishes. They fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing the same action. They make no distinction at the neural level between doing and watching someone do, between being the agent and being the witness, between self and other. Mirror neurons are thought to underlie much of what we call empathy, the ability to feel what others feel, to understand from the inside rather than simply from observation. When you wince watching someone hurt themselves, when you feel your own chest tighten watching someone cry, when you automatically mimic the smile of a person you are fond of, this is in part mirror neuron activity. Your brain is running a simulation of the other person's experience, and that simulation produces real responses in your body. Now, consider what this means for the feeling of being watched. When someone is watching you, when their attention is turned toward you with intention and focus, your mirror neuron system may be running a simulation of that watching, feeling from the inside something of what it is like to be attentive to you. And if your mirror neurons are sufficiently active, sufficiently sensitive, they may generate this simulation even when no one is explicitly watching. In response to the ambient social signals, the peripheral cues, the subthreshold inputs that the social detection system is always processing, the feeling of being watched may, in some moments, be the feeling of your own mirror system doing its extraordinary work, simulating the perspective of an observer, running the program of being seen, generating the experience of another's attention from within the architecture of your own neural self. This is one of the most mind-expanding ideas in contemporary neuroscience, that the boundaries between self and other are, at the neural level, more permeable than they seem, that your brain contains, in some functional sense, a version of every person whose gaze has ever rested on you, a model, a simulation, a running representation of how the world looks when it is looking at you. And sometimes, in the quiet of an undistracted hour, that model comes briefly to life. Let your breathing be long and very slow now. There is nothing to understand. There is only this, the warmth of your body, the stillness of the room, the soft and ancient fact of your own aliveness. We want to sit for a while tonight with something that lives at the intersection of science and experience, a place where the measurements and the models give way, finally, to something that can only be described. It has to do with the quality of attention itself. Not social attention or gaze detection or mirror neurons, but attention in its most naked and fundamental form. The simple act of being oriented toward something, of turning the face of your consciousness in one direction rather than another. William James, the great American psychologist and philosopher, one of the founders of modern psychology, wrote in 1890 that attention is the taking possession by the mind in clear and vivid form of one out of what seems several simultaneously possible objects or trains of thought. He described it as voluntary sometimes and involuntary at other times, the difference between choosing to look and being made to look by something that has caught your eye before you decided to catch it. What James could not have known, writing more than a century ago, is that attention is itself a physical phenomenon, that the focusing of mental awareness on an object corresponds to real, measurable changes in neural activity, in the amplification of certain signals and the suppression of others, in the very structure of what the brain considers real and important in a given moment. Attention makes things more real, not in a mystical sense, but in a neural one. What you attend to is processed more deeply, encoded more richly, held more durably in memory. Your attention is, in a very literal sense, what you make the world out of. And when someone else's attention is directed toward you, something happens at the level of this physical reality. You are being processed, being encoded, being held for a moment in the field of another mind. The world that person is making out of their attention includes you. And the social detection system, exquisitely calibrated to this kind of event, responds to it, sometimes consciously, sometimes only as a feeling. There is a quality of being truly seen, really attended to, that is different from simply being looked at. You have probably experienced both. The glance that passes over you as though you are furniture, and the look that meets you, that actually lands on you, that takes you in with something like genuine curiosity or care. The first barely registers, the second stays with you. It changes the quality of the moment. It makes you, very briefly, more present to yourself. This is because genuine attention is not passive. It is not simply the movement of eyes across a visual field. It is an active, intentional, effortful process, the allocation of a finite and precious resource. When someone truly attends to you, they are giving you something real, something that costs them something. And your nervous system knows the difference, even when your conscious mind has not yet formulated what the difference is. The social brain, your social brain, is sensitive not just to the direction of a gaze, but to its quality, to whether the attention behind it is genuine or performed, warm or neutral, curious or indifferent. You read this, mostly without knowing you are reading it, in the micro-expressions around the eyes, in the angle of the head, in the quality of stillness or movement that accompanies a gaze. You are continuously receiving not just the fact of attention, but its texture. And when you feel watched in that soft, ambient, undirected way that happens in quiet rooms and still moments, what your nervous system may be sensing is not just the possibility of a gaze, but the possibility of genuine attention, of being truly attended to. That ancient, warm, deeply human experience of mattering to another mind, of existing in someone's world, not as background, but as figure, as person, as the thing their consciousness has chosen from all the world to turn toward. This is a deep need, not a weakness or a dependency, but a genuine need, as fundamental to human flourishing as food or sleep. The need to be seen, to be attended to exist from time to time in the clear and vivid foreground of another person's awareness. And perhaps this, finally, is what the feeling of being watched is really about. Not the detection of a threat, not the reading of a social cue, not the firing of a particular set of neurons, but the expression of that need, a soft reaching toward the experience of being known, a quiet hope lodged in the most ancient parts of the brain that somewhere in the world someone is looking your way. If this story has touched something in you tonight, please do leave a like. It helps so much with reaching new listeners who might need exactly this. And if you want to keep exploring, our playlist has more slow science journeys like this one, waiting for you whenever you are ready. The world is very quiet now. Whatever remains of the day has settled to the bottom, the way sediment settles in still water, and what is left is clear and clean and uncomplicated. You have been on a long, unhurried journey tonight, through neuroscience and evolutionary biology, through the ancient history of the social brain, through mirror neurons and oxytocin and the quiet genius of parapersonal space. And now we are here at the edge of sleep, where the journey ends not in a conclusion, but in a dissolving. Because the most beautiful thing about everything we have explored tonight is that none of it needs to be held on to. All the science, all the mechanisms, all the elegant and intricate explanations for why your brain does what it does, they were never the point. They were the path, a gentle path that walked you slowly away from the busy surface of the day and into something quieter, something more essential. The point was always this: you are well made. Your mind is not a source of strangeness or confusion, but of extraordinary, humbling design. Every sensation you have ever had, including the ones that seemed inexplicable, including the soft shiver of feeling watched in an empty room, has been the expression of something that works, something that has been working on your behalf since before you were born, since before your parents were born, since before language gave names to any of it. Something ancient and faithful and very, very good at its job. Your nervous system has been reading the world for you every moment of your life. While you were thinking about other things, while you were sleeping, while you were distracted or absorbed or lost in thought, it was always there, scanning the air, checking the periphery, listening below the threshold of conscious hearing, maintaining the maps of space and self and other that let you move through the world as though it were familiar, as though it were home, because it is home. The world is the home of your body, and your body has always known this, even when your mind was not sure. The skin that feels the temperature of the air, the ears that pick up the distant sound of wind or water or other lives going on nearby, the eyes that move without instruction toward the things that matter, toward faces, toward light, toward the presence of other minds. Your body has always known it belongs here. It has been belonging here quietly and completely, every moment of your life. Researchers who study gratitude, its effects on the brain, its relationship to sleep and mood, and the sense of meaning, have found that even a few moments of genuine appreciation for the body's work can change the quality of rest that follows. Not gratitude as an effort or a practice, but gratitude as a simple recognition. Something is here, doing work, doing it well, doing it on your behalf. The heart is beating, the breath is moving, the nervous system is quietly tending to everything that needs tending, and nothing is required from you tonight except to receive that. So let yourself receive it now. The warmth of your breath as it leaves your body, the weight of your limbs, heavy and still, the soft dark behind your closed eyes, not empty, but full of a particular quality of restfulness that belongs only to this hour, to this moment, to the specific and unrepeatable night that you are living right now. No one needs anything from you. The world is taking care of itself. Somewhere outside, the stars are doing whatever stars do in the deep hours, burning softly, enormously, in their ancient and unconcerned way. Somewhere, water is moving. Somewhere, other people are falling asleep just as you are, in their own darkness, in their own warmth, letting the day go in the same slow, necessary way. You are part of all of that, not separate from it, not observing it from a distance, but part of it, the way water is part of the sea, distinct for a moment, and then not. The boundary between you and the night is becoming softer. The boundary between thinking and not thinking, between awareness and the beautiful absence of awareness, is becoming softer too. The feeling of being watched, that gentle, curious, ancient feeling, has done its work tonight. It brought you here. It opened a door into the science of the social brain, into the history of human sensitivity, into the deep and beautiful truth that you are a creature made for connection, made for presence, made for the warm and wordless knowledge of other minds. That is what the feeling has always been carrying underneath the strangeness of it, the simple, abiding truth that you are never really alone. And now, it can rest. The gaze detection system is quiet. The amygdala is at peace. The superior temporal sulcus, so faithfully attending all day to the direction of every eye it encountered, has finally, gratefully, closed its own. There is nothing left to sense. There is nothing left to read. There is only this, the dark, the warmth, the breath, the night. And you, inside it all, going gently, gently home.